This is Italian. Angelo. A feisty, or should I say fiery, first-generation Italian from Paterson, New Jersey, Angelo de Benedetto was an artist who set the bar high in Colorado when he moved to Central City after World War II. You'll like this next bit. He was temperamental, once knocking Jack Kerouac to his knees because the macho and at the time rather conservative, almost borderline homophobic author verbally accosted and insulted an opera singer who Kerouac believed was flirting with Angelo. During the war to end all wars, Angelo never used a gun. An aerial photographer and cartographer in the campaign against the Desert Fox, Field Marshal General Rommel in Africa, he later served as an artist whose task it was to disguise Manhattan.
Disguise Manhattan? What does that mean?
Well, the deceptive aspect of art can be very useful in war. And the United States employed artists to trick the Nazis. Cardboard tanks would be built and set on hillsides, and the sound of tanks maneuvering would be broadcast loudly in the hopes of directing enemy firepower in the direction of unmanned positions. The rooftops of strategic buildings would be painted to look like something else, or camouflaged so as to be unrecognizable. At one point, Angelo actually came up with a smoke and mirrors scheme to disguise Manhattan in the event German bombers ever got as far as the skies of New York. When I asked Angelo in 1987 about the artful trickery, he said,
"My plan is still classified, and I am not at liberty to discuss it."
Too bad it wasn't in play on September 11th, 2001. I met Angelo in 1979 when he sculpted a grave marker for the poet James Ryan Morris. Jimmy and Angelo and the filmmaker Stan Brakhage all lived in Gilpin County. Morris in Wonderview, Angelo in Central City, and Brakhage in Rollinsville. And they were pals, artists and intellectuals who would talk on the phone for hours at the local rate of 10 cents a call. Cabin fever is real when you live in the mountains, and during the bitter, cold, long, night-short days of winter, they would explore ideas and rage against bourgeois art. Brakhage told me that when he made a film of Jimmy Morris playing the role of Doc Holliday, it was the most dangerous behind-the-camera experience he ever had, as Morris carried and fired a loaded gun during the shoot. And Jimmy Morris possessed an existential drug-addicted stance that matched Doc Holliday's. Stan told me that filming Jimmy Morris playing Doc Holliday,
even more dangerous than filming calving icebergs from a canoe where death would be instantaneous should the canoe overturn and dump into the water.
Well, Angelo's tombstone sculpture consisted of a pair of moons, one half and one full, welded atop 3 steel rods, affixed to a ground-level nameplate that read P-O-E-T. The large moon was somewhat bowl-shaped, and the smaller quarter moon that fronted it was flat. At 6 feet in height, the tombstone resembles a structural expressionist's take on a poet's lyre. The play of shadow and light on the sculpture itself is is almost musical as the sun progresses across the sky. I was part of the volunteer beatnik crew who helped pour the concrete to set the sculpture on the southern side of the hill in Dory Hill Cemetery outside Blackhawk. At the time, there was a rusty iron revolving gate that you'd have to pass through to enter the cemetery grounds. And Jimmy Mars's tombstone to the left near the top of the hill was a visual complement to the eerie metal-on-metal creaking sounds of that revolving gate. You just knew you were entering a not-so-ordinary otherworldly place. The day of the sculpture installation, I also met a young woman, Kelly Sims, who assisted Angelo. A talented artist herself, Kelly was both Angelo's assistant and muse. Almost instantly, Kelly and my wife became fast friends, the result of which was that we, Marcia and I, also became fast friends of Angelo as well. Our friendship was further cemented when I hooked up Angelo with a regular customer of mine at the Boston Half Shell, where I waited tables, whom I overheard talking art. Against my better judgment and contrary to waiter etiquette, I interrupted Mr. Charles Barnett, a wealthy scrap metal entrepreneur and an over-the-top Bronco fan. Charlie personally coined the phrase Orange Crush, butting into his conversation with my assertion that I was friends with the greatest living artist in Colorado, and that if he was interested, I could probably set up a meeting and a tour of Angelo's studio, which it turned out happened the very next day. Before we'd been in Central City an hour, Angelo had a check for thousands in his hands because my call party customer, Charlie Barnett, bought a few small paintings, a drawing, and a large assemblage for his office. And that assemblage consisted of arranged polished gear wheels on an orange panel that resembled, at least in Charlie's mind, an offensive football diagram. It was a win-win for everyone. Well, everyone except me. When all was said and done, I must admit, I harbored a little resentment that neither Angelo nor Charlie had thrown any money my way after making it all happen. But I got overstiffed and put it in my bank of petty grievances under the column marked Oversights and Slights of Others. Well, over the next decade, I visited with Angelo many times, and we talked art and the politics of art in his studio atop the Mermaid Cafe. I learned of his friendship with scientists like Einstein and artists like Diego Rivera, and of Angelo's coming to grips with fame when in 1940, paintings Angelo had created in Haiti were centerfolded in Life magazine. Together, we co-produced multimedia art events in both Denver and Central City. The same year we met, we were simultaneously awarded Colorado Arts Awards from the James Ryan Morris Society, Angelo for art and me for poetry. Well, the building where Angelo lived and worked, which he had purchased when he originally arrived in Colorado, was the largest building in Central City, having been built to house a mining supplies warehouse during the boom times of Colorado gold and silver mining. To this day, his building is still the largest building in Central City. Outside of major museums, I had never seen so much art in one place. Angelo's sculptures, paintings, drawings, and assemblages, mounted, monumental, and small, filled the cavernous building. Of special note were some 60 large Conte crayon studies of the figures used in, at the time of its making, the largest mural in the United States. Angelo and his assistant Phyllis Montrose painted legal giants from history on asbestos concrete panels for the ceiling of the breezeway of the Colorado Judicial Building at 13th and Broadway in Denver. The mural was 3,000 square feet of art, weighing 7,400 pounds. Everything outside his building, outside being a steep slope with a cruel pitch, was artfully divine as well. I'm talking landscaping and bird baths and bird feeders and fountains and fences and furniture. Stonework was reminiscent of Ireland's freestanding walls, and not one item's placement was haphazard. Within his personal space, his kitchen table was utterly like no other, because over the years, dozens of visitors had carved their names or initials into its surface. And his visitors were somebodies, both local and international. Summers, when American high society visited Central City to attend the opera at the Teller House, invitations to supper at Angelo's were sought after. Eating garlic pasta at Angelo's with Kelly Sims and Marcia and Angelo, and looking at the names carved into the oak table, I came to realize that the very seat that supported my humble Irish ass once supported the asses of America's greatest cultural stars. Angela told Marcia,
"You're sitting where the burlesque entertainer, famous for her striptease act, Gypsy Rose Lee, liked to sit."
Well, the last years of Angelo's life were hard, as are most everyone's. He had always been a prominent figure both in Colorado and in Central City and in America. And against the prevailing and naive opinion that gambling is good, he fought the arrival of state-sponsored gambling in Central City and lost. He sold, then refused to sell his building, a bad faith renege that cost him dearly financially. He'd been dealing with cancer, but a stroke took him away in 1992. When his sister arrived from the East Coast to sort out his affairs, she contacted me and asked if I would conduct a memorial for Angelo. Because Angelo had been one of the prime movers in the creation of the sculpture park at Colorado and Alameda Boulevards, Burns Park. His large yellow double-arch sculpture is his. We held his memorial there on a Sunday afternoon. Hundreds attended, and I was witness to one of the most unplanned cinematic events of my life. It rained off and on all day. Setting up the gear for the event, we're talking gasoline generators and PA and etc. It was a pain in the ass. The event was scheduled for 4 p.m., and it was still raining on and off when that time approached. Every available space near the park where a car could be parked was occupied. And the small parking lot at the south end of Burns Park held 5 times the amount of cars it was built for. But when I finally turned on some music to announce that the stage was set, hundreds of people who had taken shelter from the intermittent rains got out of their cars and advanced en masse down the small slope at the southern end of the park, all carrying umbrellas. It was a moving quilt of a myriad of colors as it approached. An unplanned Christo-like happening, if you get my drift. And then at 4:15, when everyone was ready, the sun came out. A week or so after the memorial, Angelo's sister contacted me and told me that because Angelo's remaining art had been cataloged and already appraised for tax purposes, I, along with any of Angelo's friends who might like to purchase something from the collection, could come to Angelo's studio. Angelo's art had always sold for high dollars, well beyond the financial reach of me and my friends. But because the family was trying to escape paying a huge inheritance tax, everything she said had rock-bottom prices. Sculptures and paintings that sold for thousands were priced in the hundreds. Drawings were even less. So, along with a number of the Benedetto aficionados, I went and indulged myself and came to owning a number of paintings and drawings and sculptures, two of which need a little explanation. When my friends and I were about to leave the studio, Angelo's nephew remembered that he had a number of paintings not on display that he had found just that morning. Paintings which had escaped the scrutiny of the IRS and the purview of the art dealer who was going to be handling all of Angelo's art. The nephew had been walking across the floor of the top studio where Angelo did most of his sculpting, and he heard a strange squeak emanating from the floorboards. He recalled that Angelo had once told him,
"A poor artist is one who sells everything."
And so the thought of a secret stash came to the nephew's mind. And sure enough, a thorough scrutiny of the squeaking hardwood floor revealed an access point where, with the aid of a large screwdriver, his nephew unearthed a stash of some 30 canvases rolled into a log, most of which Angelo had painted in the 1930s before joining the military and before his Haitian experience that catapulted him to fame. The stash of paintings had obviously been hidden the entire time Angelo lived in Central City, works he obviously cherished for personal reasons. Most were realistic oil portraits of the avant-garde of Broadway circa the early 30s. Actors, writers, prima donnas, opera singers, and musicians. The New York artistic intelligentsia, if you will. And they all looked the parts they played in American culture with wild hairdos, clothing, and appurtenances. But two of the paintings were like no other. Painted in 1937, they were a pair of Diego Rivera-esque murals illustrating the Benedetto family farm in Connecticut circa the early 20th century. In one, the farmers were clean-shaven, unadorned men and women, plainly dressed, who looked as if they had just arrived from Italy fresh off the boat, tilling and planting a hillside in spring with manual farming implements, and by one guy's foot, an open book. In the next, the autumnal hillside was prolific with fruits and vegetables ready for harvest, and the farmers had all grown into their true selves, with beards and goatees and mustaches, forsaking the clean look they'd employed to pass through Ellis Island. As the paintings had no prices, I offered the nephew a C-note for each of the pair, as they were the same size as a few paintings priced likewise. Because of what I'd done for the family in terms of arranging the memorial, he accepted my offer. And I walked away with what I'm sure were two of Angelo's most prized possessions. Things he had hidden because he did not want to sell them, because he did not want to be a poor artist. An almost otherworldly chain of events, starting with, if you will, a squeak in the floor from beyond the grave that more than made up for me not getting a percentage of that deal I had brokered 15 years earlier. Thank you very much, Dean Roquentin. And for your musicians in the room, he has put in his 10,000 hours on that guitar.